Well, welcome to another episode of the podcast. This one, I have got my guest, Owen. If you watch the main channel, you would have seen him in there. Welcome to podcast, Owen. We've been talking off camera for about 10 minutes, and I was like, we have to start because there's a load of things we're talking about, which you all could be listening to. So I'm just going to do the news quickly, Owen, by all means, if you have, because I think actually a couple of these brands, or at least one of them, I know you've worked for. So if you've got anything you want to add, you can add. But I'll do the news quickly because then we've got so much to talk about. Audi Q4 is being facelifted for 2026. New interior. It's going to have increased range, going to go up to 367 miles on its EV battery. Apparently, it's Audi's best EV seller. That surprise you?
It is. It's also top of the C segment BEV SUV space. They sell it, considering the price point above platform shares. It's very, very popular in the UK, selling very strongly.
Okay. They're introducing vehicle-to-home charging on that car, which that to me is probably doesn't seem like such a big factor. If you're listening to this and you either don't have an interest in EVs or you haven't had an EV, the big thing, if you have solar panels on your house or you have a cheap tariff, the idea that you could pull cheap energy in from the grid overnight, put it into your car, but then the next day use it to run, your washing machine. So free or on that cheap electricity, that's been something up to now. You need to go and buy a battery.
It's huge. The opportunity for that is massive. We've had V2L, vehicle to load.
Yes.
And now effectively this is vehicle to grid, and Audi rolling that out, and it takes there's actually some hardware change as well as software to achieve that. But yeah, the possibilities for that are endless. Your car becoming a huge battery.
Is it a lot of hardware, you think, or just?
So it depends on the platform you're on, but it totally depends. But it's not straightforward to retrofit that system to a car. So that would have been a big part of the carve up for Audi for the facelift. So actually doing that at facelift point is quite
that's what I was surprised at. I mean, they've added other things. There's more drive assist modes and stuff like that. So the first three didn't really surprise me. To put a different interior in a facelift car, to increase the range, to add more driving assist. That's all fairly sort of not quite boilerplate, but it is kind of what you expect from a facelift now. That I was surprised they were adding vehicle to home chart, but
Audi getting more and more thorough, and also bear in mind that car is a global car. So the volume riding on that car is significant. Therefore, for a facelift, they'll be investing a lot to get that right based on market demands. And obviously, with the mileage improving, I know it's not a huge jump in range for the facelift,
right?
But there is definitely the weight of kind of mileage expectations. C segment especially is moving up, so they had to respond to that. But no, very successful car in the UK.
I think also because the 367, which is I don't know if I say 365, it's 367 miles, but that's the WLTP figure. There's always some people can achieve the WLTP. I'd never have in an EV. So if it's over 300, for me, that means what they're basically saying is you should, in the real world, get 300 plus, which is kind of a
lot of variables to that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
When petrol, diesel, yeah.
Yeah, I know. This is, again, it's an odd thing for me, having for so long, from selling cars to reporting on cars to driving, like the idea that, let's say a Golf with a 1.6 engine 15 years ago could do 40 miles per gallon on the WLTP or NEDC testing at the time. So you kind of had in your head, I should be able to get 35, and then on a run, I'll get, somewhere around 40. We seem to live in like a completely different era because there's testing in the US. I actually have to say, I find the US EV range, is it MPGE, I think they give an equivalent to an MPG from the range. But however they do the calculations, I find their figures generally are more sort of bang on for what you'll get at the midpoint, because all batteries will do more if they get the right temperature and if you're in the right conditions, and obviously less if it's -10 and you're throttling it and all that.
There is that, but also USA have a different way of measuring gallons, right? So UK MPG is different to usually. There's quite a lot. There's a lot of variables at play there.
You're absolutely right. I'm going to carry on with the news because otherwise we'll end up in a conversation about how it is and we won't get stuff. Amoda. So actually, Amoda and JQ, because they are one company, right?
Yeah. Got Cherry.
Okay. So the story is that Amoda and JQ have passed 1 million sales globally in less than 3 years. I would guess from the JQ7 sales success.
Yeah, although Motor 5 is also very, very strong.
Is it?
And that's also a global car.
Okay. So yeah, it's a joint sort of announcement from those two. Do you think Do you actually know why there are two brands there? I know there's a little bit of place in like, why do you have Volkswagen and Audi? I know there is.
There's a whole podcast on that in terms of how Chinese brands how do that in terms of their naming strategy. So often, if they have a new kind of design direction, they'll sometimes put a different brand on it. And those two cars are platform shares.
This is what I was thinking. How come they're not
Same
just
platform? So JQ at the moment is internal combustion and it's a plug-in hybrid, and they've just released a hybrid version.
Okay.
The Omoda 5, which shares the platform, is electric only or internal combustion only, but they're just now bringing out a hybrid version. So when I went into a JQ Omoda dealer just over a year ago when they first launched in the UK and said, so what's the difference between the JQ and the Omoda? And the sales exec couldn't really explain it to me. But they do look different and they're clearly very successful. But no, it's a very big milestone for them. I think they've accelerated massively, and it's a Chery group. They have multiple brands in Chery, and Omoda and JQ are two very successful brands.
Is it Chery that have partnership with Land Rover for Chinese production? I reported a couple of weeks ago that the Freelander's coming back, but as I understand it, it's going to be a brand actually going into China. So the Freelander brand will exist. It's not. I don't think necessarily it's confirmed that will come into other markets yet, whether it will or not. But it's going to be built, I think, by Chery over there and released as a Freelander brand. But it's like a JV.
Joint venture, JV. Yeah. So they haven't talked about their internationalization strategy in too much detail. There's no guarantee that car comes to Europe.
Right. Yeah.
But yes,
which is what I said on the podcast if you're watching. So yeah, good. I'm glad I'm right. But carry on. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've just released that car at the Beijing Auto Show, and the Beijing Auto Show is last week's the biggest one yet. So absolutely huge, multiple different unveilings. But that was quite a big deal. First time Land Rover have done that. I think they did a platform share many years ago. Back in 1991, they had the Honda Crossroad.
Yeah, with the Freelander, wasn't it?
Discovery. Discovery one. Yeah. It's not completely new to Land Rover doing that. They just haven't done it for a very, very long time.
Yes, if you listen to this and you watch the main channel and you've seen, I think that was in the buyer's guide. I can't actually remember which Discovery buyer's guide, but I found that out as I was making the guide, and I'm like, I'm just going to slide this in. It has no relevance to someone buying one, but it's that thought.
It's interesting, right?
It is. It's like, this is like I say to a lot of people on the miles driven, I'm not necessarily just reviewing a car or doing a buyer's guide for it or reporting on it. I try and find that what's that little bit that probably is going to get completely ignored by everyone else. You know, and sometimes it's a sort of tiny faceted detail that maybe doesn't matter to a lot of people, but if it gives a differentiation, you know, why not? Especially in today's market. Okay, so they've hit 1 million sales globally in less than 3 years. And then BMW Classic Partner Program is coming to the UK. It's going to 4 dealers. So this is a certified retailer side restoration service. So it'll be at the Wilmslow dealer, the Stevenage dealer, the Hailsham dealer and Bristol dealer. And it's essentially support for parts, repairs of classic BMs. And I had a quick look. They can do restorations at the dealer, but it's everything. They're saying it's everything from pre-war cars up to E46 generation. So E46 M3 would fall into this. As best I can see, it's about 2005. They don't actually give like it's this year to this year. I'd love someone to go and take a pre-war BMW into a main dealer and say, can you restore
7 or something? Be amazing.
Yeah. But apparently, I mean, that's what they're saying that these dealers have the ability to do. They have the part support from obviously BMW in Germany.
The original drawings as well.
I was going to say, there's got to be a lot of...
That's where the value is, I think. We're having all those original and having access to those engineers. And
they'd have to retool, right?
They would have probably tier 1 suppliers who could do that for them. So they probably would have agreed a supply base to be able to do these things, and they'd take that challenge. So Bentley have just done did the Speed 6, the blowers, the recreations. It took them a long time to do, but they found suppliers to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, like, let's just say you've got a 330 Ci. Okay, so you've got a coupe. Yeah. If your front wing was rusted, I'm sure you could probably get a pattern part from someone who's copied a mold, but BMW are not right today going into their factory and saying, can we take, a load of 3 Series off the line? I need to make one front wing because someone's rusted theirs. So just interesting to me that they would obviously have to have someone they trust, take the original blueprint for that part and then...
The parts still may exist, but bear in mind those are commonly used parts, regularly accident damage parts. The body panels actually they'll have again. A tier one supplier still makes those parts today, especially with the nav.
Do you think that would be true of all parts? Because there's some cars, for example, get written off because there's damage to a part of it that can't, like, is either back ordered. So I've sold cars parts for a while, and you'd have it occasionally, especially if someone had, I don't know, just something 30 years old. Up to 15 years old. I actually had a conversation with someone once because they believed that there was a law on support of parts. And I said, there isn't a law, not in the UK. Maybe there's one wherever, if you're watching this, where you are, but there isn't a law, but there is a general guideline that manufacturers follow from a point of view of, and as Owen will know a lot about this in product, but like, we don't want our cars to be worth nothing after 6 years because we've given up support of them. And so generally there was an idea of sort of 15-year-ish marker.
Yeah, especially specialist cars. There are actually some...
Specialist kind of falls into a different... I'm talking about your Ford Focus 1.6. Sure. Just something that's, obviously someone might try and save an RS Focus at 20 years old, even if it's financially not viable, just because there's so few of them or whatever. But for your average, ready run-of-the-mill car, there's going to be a point where parts suppliers go, we don't sell enough.
Yeah. There is, in some markets, there is a kind of law, and typically speaking, I say kind of, it's very hard to be specific, but it's typically 10 years. So if you're going to, and that's the point, 10 years from the point the car stops production.
Okay, so that's sort of, if it starts in 2000, carries on to 05, you'd have support until 15.
Yeah, but I suppose that actually links into some manufacturers it demonstrates their commitment to the longer term, right? So some manufacturers go beyond that. It means they've got credibility to brand, and it means they have faith in their products actually carrying on for a long period of time.
I think Porsche actually ran an ad campaign. In fact, I'm sure they did, because I remember seeing it, where some bloke calls up. This is how the ad's pictured. Is some bloke calls up, a woman answers the phone, and she can't understand what he's asking for, and she's putting it into the system, and the old senior manager sees the trouble she's having and laughs, and then types in a different number or puts her on a different system, and it's a tractor from 100 years ago. And of course, then they show him pull up in his tractor that's 100 years old, give him the part, and off he goes into the sunset. And it was kind of their point of it. It doesn't matter what you bought from us, we support it. And I thought that if you're talking about trying to support residual values and keeping people buying 50-year-old.
It's a great brand message. I mean, people often churn out the how many of the percentage of the vehicles we've built, how many percentage-wise are still on the road. And that links into the whole brand pedigree, and especially nowadays, where people are looking for those USPs because they're under threat by new brand market entrants from other brands coming in. Therefore, what does your actually brand? What's the depth? What's the durability? What's the legacy? And that kind of part supply, I think, great move from BMW. Even if that's a wash, even if they don't make particularly large amount of money from that program, they're actually bringing people back into the brand, actually making those cars interesting.
I thought this might be a little bit of, there's people out there who've got E39 M5s, who've got E46 M3s, who currently have, an X5 on the driveway, or they have maybe an i4, whatever they need. But the idea that they can keep that support means their next car, maybe it would have been an Audi, but actually, I don't know, they've sort of got
to me, And I think that program is quite interesting. I would forecast the majority of their cars would be at the newer end, because it's generational piece, right? So people now they might have had an M3 46 CSL, a poster on their bedroom all growing up. Now they want to be able to get that car and keep it going for longer, and also it cements the values of those cars in future. And if you have very high value classic vehicles, that actually means your overall brand value increases.
Going up.
So it's a really interesting example for BMW. And I would love, when I have another E34 M5, to be able to keep that going even longer.
This is exactly it. I suppose there are, a growing number of people who will say, I really loved X car. And I did a video recently, which I think the title we went with in the end was Are Old Cars Better? But really were 10-year-old cars. So specifically comparing a car that's brand new to 10 years old. And I kind of got the feedback which I thought I would, which is a lot of people said, if I could buy a 10-year-old car brand new, I would. Because 10-year-old cars kind of had a lot of the stuff that people wanted, didn't have a lot of things they weren't asking for. And so, you have this sort of play between the two sort of markets of, you can't buy a 10-year-old car brand new because it won't meet. Actually, there's
some examples.
There is an exception. I think the ND MX-5 is an exception, although it had to have a pretty heavy reworking for 2025 to get it to go another couple of years. But and Volvo XC90, I think I mentioned that in the video we did. But there's a couple of examples, but overall, those cars are not the car they were 10 years ago. They've been filled with them.
Well, not legally allowed to be. So like the communication piece, the data protection side, the cybersecurity side, means you have this. It's what's killed the Porsche 718, for example.
Yes, and so this is where I think if you were out there and you said 718 is a great example. If you were out there and you said, I would really like a brand new 4-litre GTS, or if you're you, but you know, if you wanted a 4-litre in a 718 platform. You can't buy it. They might have a few left on dealer stock. Like they might have built some in 2025. But ultimately, the car you want is not sold anymore. So you may say, well, I just want a 0 mile. So how do I get a 0 mile 4-litre GTS? Well, the answer is buy a 2021. And if you can take it to a manufacturer who will essentially replace everything and anything that makes it feel like it's been used. So steering wheel, seats, carpets, all that stuff inside. Bushes, I mean, like literally every single bush in the car, and you know, put some new wheels on it. Obviously, replace or respray paint. If people are actually willing to pay that, if you would say, I'd spend the whole price of the car all over again to have it like new, and people do. I mean,
I do.
You're an example. There are people out there who are just like, I could spend, £100,000 on a brand new 911 Carrera S, but I want to spend £100,000 on a 996 turbo. So I'm going to go and buy a 996 turbo with 80,000 miles on it for 30-40 grand. And then I'm going to spend 60 grand on it to make it basically new. There's people out there. So I guess,
if that's what if that was really wanted. I mean, I suppose that was the genesis of all the resto mods, right? So they want something a bit more modern. So they want something that had working air conditioning, decent headlights, and a stereo that they can run Apple CarPlay from. I mean, that's been a huge piece because time moves on and technology moves on. So tire technology 10 years ago is very, very different to how it is now. And I don't know about you, but I've not been particularly purist about it. I like the original silhouette of the car, but actually if it can be improved modern technology. So I have a very old Lotus from 1962 that's got modern electronic ignition now, modern fuel pumps. It's got LED lighting now, so it can actually be seen at night. I just think it was making it more usable.
I think there was a change that happened maybe 15 years ago. I don't know. It was the generation that grew up, except like modifying cars. That then went, okay, they met the generation that said, if you modify it, it's lost value. I'm not interested in it. And they got that little bit older and they stopped caring as much. And you found this middle ground. I mean, young, like a 17-year-old today, they don't care at all. They'll modify anything. It's because why not? They're all trying to look for something individual. And if the 40-year-olds of today are also doing the same thing, you get this acceptance through line that actually, if best example I can think of, original Defender. In fact, people want a bit of originality on Series 1, 2, 3, but a 1991 Defender, someone will go, well, I've put LEDs on it because the candles that were used as the original headlights are not, no one thinks they're any good anymore. And, I've put whatever, they might have replaced the engine, put a LS V8 in it or whatever, but they've kept some original character. And I think that's probably the line between what someone says, this is just someone's personal modification product, and this is actually trying to make the bits of it that now have aged so badly. Headlights, great example. Or I know there was a bit of a rally against putting new stereos in old cars, and then Porsche do it, BMW do it, where they'll sell you a head unit that goes in with Apple CarPlay and it replaces the original and it kind of looks like it.
And that was led by the aftermarket. So that was people like Blabhunt doing a head unit, which actually had, instead of it had a cassette slot, but actually you flip it down, there's a USB and all in there, those kind of things. So that's actually a great example of how the aftermarket can actually start to lead OEMs as well.
That's actually, I have written questions for this podcast. I'm sure people are like, oh, okay, you're just going to have a chat. But the one thing I was going to ask you there, what do you think the future is for the modified car world?
I think you're right. And modifications are evolving massively, and customer tastes are. So they used to be more extremes, I think, and we've just alluded to what you just said. So there was the traditional person who wanted to restore the car to effectively concourse.
Yeah.
I personally rile against concourse because I think what happens is, and I've done it before, through lived experience, make a car immaculate. You end up not driving it, and it ends up sitting there like it did before it was restored. Or then you feel like you can't use it and then sell it. I like my cars to be usable.
I should say, I'm going to just have an input there. That didn't you restore a car for the festival of the?
I restored 2. Yes.
Yeah. To basically perfect, pristine concourse condition.
Yes, I did.
So you've done it.
I am the person who commissioned a full respray on a 1998 Suzuki Daewoo Lanos. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So there's just a bit of double speak going on there. It's like I rally against concourse at the same time I might be doing it, but to very different cars. Wasn't an F4.
It's almost ironic concourse. But yes, I take the point. The cars for me should be usable. There's nothing worse than keeping them tucked away, and it's the worst thing for them. So things like bushes and everything wear out, and it's not good at all. I have cars I don't use very often. I should use more often. But in terms of you answering your question about the modified car scene, modification, the resto mod seems to be the middle way.
Right.
And I think typified by people like Volkswagen Group. So, for example, people taking an old G40 Polo, maybe, and then sacrilege, taking out the supercharged engine, putting a 1.8T, those kind of things.
Yeah.
That's quite a common path now and quite well understood, and more people do that. If that makes the car more usable, if that makes the car more, people like the silhouette, want modern mechanicals, I'm all for that. I think technology moves on.
Do you think it's that people who were around when those cars were new just think that an identity of the original car gets lost because in another 30 years, for example, in that modification of changing them to 1.8 turbos, I completely get why you would, especially because that was a pretty good engine to put into them, and you can get a nice bit of horsepower out of them fairly easily. But then in 30 years, another generation will come along and think that all those G40s were sold with 1.8 turbos because they've never seen one
changed. Yeah, I mean, there is that. I mean, it depends on how big a part of the original car the attribute was. So it was actually a terrible example I gave, because that G-Ladder turbocharged 1.3 was an overhead valve engine with a supercharger. It was amazing, right? Why would you change that?
Yeah.
So it depends how the powertrain attribute. So, for example, a resto mod, there's people electrifying old Rolls Royces, and some people think that's sacrilege, but actually, the powertrain in that was a bit of a boat anchor. The engine weighs so much, it didn't rev very highly, it was very, very quiet, but actually that's perfect for a resto mod in terms of an electric drivetrain.
Yeah.
So it totally depends on the attribute you're changing. If you're messing with an attribute of the car, so for example, taking a Honda ST1000, ripping out the F20 and putting in a V6, that's probably not going to appeal to many people doing that, because the powertrain was such a big part of that car originally.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. I think people, if they have clever things, they do things, and modify the right things in the right way. Yeah. So for example, a modern powertrain, for me, a really appealing resto mod would be a Citroen DS with a fun modern powertrain, because the original 2.4 engine wasn't much cop, but actually the rest of the car was brilliant. So why not put a more modern powertrain in that actually lifts the whole car? So
it's more about taking the cars that possibly didn't have some things that you should be able to appreciate about them, but either had an engine or a suspension or whatever the component was that really now is so dated that, I definitely see that part of the modified world. I'm thinking, I wonder, sort of companies obviously have set up and down the country who remap cars, for example, and 2020 ECU started getting locked and they had to get sent to Finland and stuff like that, and so it becomes more expensive.
Still ways around, but yes,
exactly. And the same exhausts are a funny one. I grew up in the generation where you had a dustbin attached to the back of the circular saxo. That was sort of like when I was very young, and even before I had a license, that was kind of what everyone was doing. Then because turbocharging came in, everyone had dump valves. Yeah, that was actually you had exhaust noise, but it was more dump valve, and the exhausts were not necessarily popping and crackling. They were just, the only thing actually making that noise was like a TVR. Yeah, you knew it was a TVR because it was making that overrun sound. Then in the last 5 or 10 years, we've got a lot of popcorn, shotgun, whatever you want to call
pops and bangs,
your pops and bangs type. And obviously that's taken exhaust tuners, some tuners in one direction, others have rallied against it and been like, well, we're just ruining everyone's day here, and we're just going to get a clamp down on our entire culture if we do that. And it's happening. Yeah, it is. I mean, like EU regs, isn't it? A brand new car, doesn't matter what it is. I think it's 90, I can't remember actually.
The drive-by noise regs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's dipping below 100 now. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like,
On the track, and on some racetrack, it's even more extreme than the road rig.
Yeah. Seen that, the amount of cars that can't actually go and do a track day. And there's all these funny, if you ever go to a track day in the UK, you'll see someone who's got what looks like 2
beans on the back or something.
Yes.
Yeah,
And it's just a big silencer
It is,
eventually on the back of their exhaust. So they can keep going.
GT3 RSs, a good example. They're often falling foul of that. GT4 RSs.
And these are cars that were passing the road regs, at least when they were new.
Yeah.
But because of, again, I always say that with cars, if you do something and you highlight it to the population of people that are not into cars, there will be a regulation brought in against it, and then you'll lose it. And I think exhausts are a good one. But there's a lot of companies, especially in the UK, they tune engines up, building stainless steel exhausts, custom, K&N is obviously the most known for putting a different filter in the car that no one ever cleans. Just as combined who I do. We found the person that cleans. But I do wonder then if that industry can keep going. If I say like ECUs are getting locked off, and it becomes, when I was 18 and I had an Audi S3, it was remapped because it was not that expensive for an 18-year-old to do to what was quite a nice car at the time. But I was selling cars out a little bit more money. My friends probably couldn't have afforded to do it, but by the time they were 21, they could. Now, if that's a huge sum of money to do comparable to then, you're going to have people go, well, actually cars are pretty powerful. I've got a lot of options from factory. So we talk about wheels all the time, like if you get a great set of wheels on a car, a standard Golf GTI with a performance pack on it. So the manufacturer has modified the car for you. There it is.
Well, they lose revenue if they don't, right? So having worked in OEMs, you do look at some, especially in performance and specialist OEMs and luxury OEMs, what's the aftermarket doing? It's like, we're missing that revenue. So if someone's spending thousands and thousands of pounds modifying the car, why don't you do that ourselves? So just give away that revenue, because you save bill of material cost as well. So if you upgrade a wheel on a car, so you go to a 21 from a 20, the incremental customer value of that is massive. But the cost of you doing that is actually relatively small. You got to develop a new wheel. The cost of the wheel difference is not very big unless you do a really complex finish and you've got to change the tyre, which typically speaking isn't a big gap. So that's actually manufacturers doing more and more of that. And you mentioned about things like Audi Black Editions, those kind of things. The margins are incredible on those, really, really good. And it negates the need to do those kind of modifications. But back to a point you made about the exhaust side, it's the pops and bangs is the engine mapping. And effectively, that's been inspired by Group B rally cars in the 1980s, right? So it's anti-lag, right? That's what it is. That's anti-lag,
Yeah, but true anti-lag.
But it's so bad for your engine and really bad for your catalytic converter, and also really antisocial. So as a modified car community, of which I'm a proud member, I've modified many cars over the years, mainly for track work. We do need to consider the impact we have on other people as well with the pops and bangs. They don't make the car go any faster. But yeah, so I think there's a middle way, and we don't want to go to the stage again in the UK because we're so into our cars here that in France, for example, it's illegal to modify a car in those kind of ways. And Germany's got TÜV regulations as well, which are far more draconian. We might be going in the same direction. So there's many things we do to modify a car to make them far more powerful, far more fun to drive. But we just got to be careful about the effect that has on other people. Right.
Absolutely. I think the German example and the French example at us is a really good one, because I suppose if you go to the US, it's probably the most extreme of basically, as long as it all...
anything goes.
Pretty much. Apart, maybe California is probably the one state where you're going to get smog tested, but apart from that, other places have weird laws about basically if you can say you're testing it for track use, it doesn't even have to have bodywork on it and crazy stuff. So they're in one end of the spectrum. I'm sure someone from the US will say, no, in my state, you can't do this. But in general, then you've got maybe the UK just after them, as sort of, you've got, you'll get pulled over if you haven't got a back bumper on. But apart from that, it's not going to be too bad for you. And then, you look at Germany, as you say, TÜV regulation. So if we were going anywhere, I wouldn't be too bad, because at least you could, if you're putting lowering springs on your car now, they probably already TÜV compliant.
Yeah, a lot of them are. Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're trying to sell in Germany and the UK. But the French way would be devastating, because you essentially, it's really, I saw YouTube channel, I watched Mighty Car Mods. They went to France, and it's a really small scene. I thought it was great they went there, but like when they were doing bits to the car and they were like, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do that. And obviously their channel's Mighty Car Mods. They're two Australian guys.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, you know it.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're kind of known for modifying stuff, but you can't. They ended up like servicing the car, and I think they changed the wheel rim because they could change the rim as long as the tyre stayed the same.
But isn't that ironic? Because the France has turned out some of the best modified cars ever.
This is kind of where that conversation leads. It's like, how does that country of all of them, but.
I mean, I suppose the example I give is the Renault Clio 182 Trophy, of which I'm a happy ex-owner and restored. So that car was a 182 Cup, and they put on these remote reservoir sack dampers. Pain, because you have to rebuild them, and I've had to live that in the front dampers, doing restoring after a while. That was actually a region the UK region wanted to really push the car to the next level. There was an enthusiast, I'm not going to say who it was, but he works in the PR sphere and the product sphere within Renault UK, and so we want to take this car to the next level. What can we do? People are missing the Clio V6 is gone. We need a new aspirational kind of car, and we want to take this car to the next level. And the guys in Dieppe Julie delivered those dampers, and it transformed the car.
But I want to know how you even get the talent in the first place, because if the way I always think is engineers in the UK probably at like 15 years old were like, I don't know, fiddling with the bikes or something, and then by the time they were 17 they bought some absolute snotter of a car and they were trying to fix it, and that's what then meant they went and got qualifications to do it, and before you know it, they're 20 years into a career trying to argue that they should put bigger wheels on a car, whatever.
It's scarring me there.
Yes. But you think if you don't have that initial stage, how does even the language work when you say people want this? If you like, well, that's illegal. You know what I mean? Like, if in your head, well, you can't do that.
I suppose
you get that talent.
That's one of the great things about motorsport, right? I mean, that's what it actually can inspire people, as well as being marketing angle. It can actually inspire people to want to do more exciting things with cars. I mean, if you have a platform that's actually pretty good and you think it can do more, you might be motivated to actually, I don't know, lived it. People are actually motivated to go in and see what more you can do. Yeah. Also, the competitive market moves on. So there's a bit of an arms race in the hatchback sector, for example, one up on each other all the time. So therefore, and if a car is aging in its life cycle, so for example, the Clio at the time was quite late in its life cycle, what can you do to inject some passion and vigor into that car and lift the brand overall for a very small outlay? An example of that is that 182 Trophy, which they also sold a few of in Switzerland, but that was a UK-based car.
Right.
So yeah, and that's actually lifting the overall brand of that car to the end of its life cycle is actually quite a difficult skill, and that was a really good way of doing it.
Do you think, talking about, like, if we just stick with that car, in the moment of time that was in, and immediately when you said it, I thought to myself, well, no one at that time would have thought Mercedes A45 AMG would have 400 horsepower in a hatchback. And then obviously I know there's the RS3 and stuff, but I'm picking that car because it was like 2016. They came and everyone was like, that's a lot of power to be putting in a hatchback. I think it was in the 300s, but the high 300s. And now, if a manufacturer was, for example, running out a car, they can, because it's turbocharged and everything else, they can maybe find 20 horsepower, and that can be their headline. But a 2-litre naturally aspirated engine, making 180 PS, 180 horsepower back then.
Yeah,
you probably couldn't squeeze 10 more horsepower out of it without it costing.
Well, you need some big. You have to rehomologate the whole powertrain.
So this is why I'm thinking back then was the answer. We'll change the suspension. Whereas now, would someone go? So we can spend a lot of money going to a third party, getting them to develop suspension, and trying to sell our last hurrah on upgraded suspension, or we can get a couple of people to find another 20 horsepower from the engine. Maybe there'll be a hardware change, but it's going to be,
the suspension's easier. So if you think about it,
okay.
So you have to do a whole new emissions program if you're going to change the power outside of even on the turbocharged car, outside of the parameters. So you've got a small parameter either side, which won't affect the emission program.
Yeah,
that's a big program to do. A lot of that has to be validated by lots of different entities. For example, if you think about the example we've just given, the Trophy, that's a single shock absorber. There's no body work changes, no body and white change. You don't have to re-crash test the car to draw the hole in a different place. It's actually relatively straightforward to do.
You're just swapping out
so
component.
So the bolts in the same way. The thing is a different place, the remote reservoir unit, but that's about it. So yeah, it's very hard to mess with powertrain late in the life cycle.
But to be a bit of a cynic, would there not have been a product planner on day one of that car's lifespan saying 1 year from the end of it, we need to squeeze 20 more horsepower from it. So in its original homologation, can we get the engine through the following emissions? 300, 340, and then a 350. And I'm not going to release the 350 for 5 years, but at least I haven't got to do anything.
Very good. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, that's what happens. But then, in the interim time, your legislative and legal framework can change. So you can new regulation come in that actually could that final jump to 20 PS extra might start a whole new program because you've got to reset because other things have moved in the meantime.
Yeah.
Also, that might not be enough. So you'll have a life cycle plan at the beginning and map out all those things. Absolutely.
Yeah.
For the whole life cycle. It depends on how the car is received. So if the car is received really badly, you might need to do more. And you might need to pull forward the full model change, which changes your existing cycle plan. If the car goes really well, you might need to change less. So you might need to actually think, well, the car's a cash cow. We need to invest in a lot of model lines. We'll take out some of the money in the life cycle and actually put that into different models to make them sell because this car's doing just fine by itself. Thank you very much.
So two extreme examples of that I could probably pick out today. The latest C63 AMG brought in the 2-litre 4-cylinder. That obviously Mercedes had a plan for that.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm not going to be critical of the car because I looked into the technical understanding of what they were trying to apply.
It was amazing.
It was absolutely incredible. But then I also understood that was sort of people who are borderline thinking of sort of more, they're right on the line of building something for motorsport. They sort of went, yeah, this would work in Formula One. This makes a lot of sense, and whatever else, and maybe didn't quite look so much at a customer who was like, I've got a 4-litre V8. I bought it for a 4-litre V8. I want to rev it, and it sounds like a 4-litre V8. And you've
it's mapping of the attributes. So and rationally, that car makes complete sense. More efficient. It helps with the emissions programs. It means that the car is less antisocial in terms of regulators in many different markets.
Yeah.
Potentially what Mercedes/AMG missed maybe was the weighting towards emotion side, so that the noise the car makes and the interaction of the powertrain.
So as I understand it, they will be another C63 with a V6 engine. They're going to use, I think, one out of the E50. I think it's E55 has a V6 hybrid system, 3-litre V6, and I think they're going to. Basically, the next C63.
Yeah, 6-cylinder, if it's whether it's straight 6 or V6. But there is talk about the CLE, for example. I think there is talk about getting a V8 back actually as well, potentially.
Yes. But and the interesting point that I wanted to bring up, because it was, as you said there, maybe it goes great and you don't have to make any changes. Maybe you've planned the life cycle out and got 20 horsepower at the end of it. But in the first year, you've gone, no one's buying this.
Yeah.
In fact, people are telling us, they're going into the showroom and saying, I wouldn't buy that if it's free. Type attitude.
Yeah. And there was some extreme reaction to that powertrain, not just from the media, but from customers as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a great example.
So in that case, I guess they either have to reallocate money because they would have had a plan to spend some more money on it to refresh it throughout its lifespan, but a whole new engine.
Usually they spend it all at the front end and then go back later. So at the start of a program, we always have a cycle plan budget.
Yeah.
And then, typically speaking, you spend more than you intend to getting the car to production. You want to get that last detail. You want to improve things for launch or do some more things at launch to give it the best possible start. Yeah. But budgeting over a whole car program, done a lot of that. But yes.
So in that case, would you just sort of sit there and go, no one's buying it, we're just going to leave it there because it's going to be so, I mean, I can't imagine it's cheap. I think actually the C-Class does have, I don't want to go on too long about Mercedes things, so I've got a lot of questions for you, but I think they do actually sell, or I think the chassis can accept a V6. They didn't have to do anything to it because I think it shares some stuff with the E-Class.
The space under the bonnet?
Yeah.
A lot of time, yeah.
So there would still have been a development cost of whip out a 2-litre, put in a V6, I guess more than they were willing to accept just to, say, knock the car in the head in 2 years. Because they left it on the market. I mean, they don't sell that many from what I understand, but they've left it out there.
They left it out there to keep it running. And also bear in mind that powertrain was used in other cars, the SL, all those kind of things. And in the other applications, it was fine. A hybridized 4-cylinder is fine. The fact it went into a flagship AMG and effectively Mercedes was saying at the time when they're launching the car, this is great. This is really high tech. We're giving you more horsepower. We're not gaining any weight. You've got lower emissions, all these great things.
Yeah.
And the customers, the market was shrugged effectively.
Yeah.
But it's a technical tour de force. It is incredible. And I've got a huge amount of respect for that powertrain. And Mercedes are using it elsewhere. It's not been a folly because that, actually, not as across the rest other platforms. But
yeah, and I think it does very well in several different, well, like you're saying, and I think in some markets it probably was going to be more accepted than others, but ultimately, I suppose maybe they thought their rivals wouldn't carry on with straight sixes and
It's
V6s.
taxation as well. I mean, you look at France. You go past a certain engine size or emission standard, and straight away it's adding up sometimes tens of thousands of euros to price the car.
Yeah.
So actually, the safest plan, if you wanted high performance and you wanted a performance car to go globally,
Yeah.
Mercedes was a logical place to go because
Yeah.
what they did, because it means across most markets they can sell that vehicle. But the emotional side, some people felt was lacking.
Yeah, I have to. The last thing I'll say on it, by means you can say, but the last thing I would say on it is that I actually looked at it at one point thinking I can completely get that people will say, "Oh yeah, well it's it's not what I want for it." But if you then said, "I want something that is fast, is capable, and is a saloon," or I don't know if they did I think they did do an estate version. But I don't want to, I need something that can do the miles per gallon. Just the idea of spending, especially when fuel prices go up, everything else. Actually, you've got, 3-litre engines in other cars. Mercedes is the only one where you could say, I could probably eke out decent miles per gallon when I'm just commuting and still get a decent drive. I'm not going to say it was the best of the handling pack because it went off some really stiff competition, M3 particularly. But still sort of have some dynamism to enjoy. And
that's all very rational, yeah, which is right.
I was going to say,
and probably people, I'm sure I do it myself. People make a list of all the attributes they're looking for, and on paper, that car hit all of those points in that kind of format, right?
Yeah.
It's right size, quality, pricing wasn't too bad, emissions are fine, and they could imagine driving long distance. Potentially, two things happened: they went to drive the car, and they'd cross-shopped it against something like an M3 or an M4, and then secondly, they will have read the media response to that car as well.
Yeah.
And the concerns around it. I think when people saw the technical specification of that car, because you have when you have a launch of a car, you unveil the first press release and the pictures. You then have a bit of time, if for Western brands at least, until the media ride and drive happens. There was that people were into that media ride and drive with a level of skepticism about that powertrain, and they weren't really on side with it because the emotionalness of a 6-cylinder or more likely 8-cylinder car.
Yeah.
So therefore, there wasn't a goodwill behind it. So even though
there wasn't
super rational, it's still ultimately a £100,000 C-Class.
Yes.
But yeah, fascinating example.
Yeah.
But again, no credit to Mercedes. That powertrain has been very successful in other parts, but in that specific model, which was so wedded to that original 6.2 litre, and before that the C43 and the C35, it had such a long pedigree of that platform, having really emotional powertrains, and such a big part of AMG's brand DNA was to be that performance sledgehammer making that noise. And I'd argue the original C63 was leading because the powertrain was so dominating,
right?
And it was naturally aspirated. But yeah, and then going to that in a relatively short space time, going to a hybridized 4-cylinder turbo, an amazing one, I would say. It was maybe too big a step too quickly potentially.
I realised that because you have Audi just released a new RS5, for example, and with that they've gone 6-cylinder but plug-in hybrid system. So they kind of, I'm sure they're probably already planning it, but it's an interesting idea that they sort of were able to look at the market, because Mercedes went first into saying, we think we can do a big downsize and do plug-in and get that market. And obviously that market said, you've come
to 2 power, just 6 went straight to 4.
I know.
Amazing.
I wonder on the other side is if they weren't making that engine anymore, because they do still keep making it. It goes to the AMG GT. So they could be sort of pointed at and go, well, you still make the engine though, so why can't I have it? And it's kind of like, if you take something away completely, like they did with the 6.2, when it was gone, it was gone.
Yeah.
So, you have to, if people were upset about turbocharging, they had to get into the 4-litre twin turbo and actually then appreciate it.
It was fantastic.
It helped that it was a fantastic engine, and Aston Martin went and had it, and everyone else, went, look, actually. But I do wonder if it's because maybe they still had their engine around. Other manufacturers still had competition around. If it had been sort of just compared to other cars that were 2-litre plug-in hybrids or whatever, maybe it would have. But and maybe that'll come in 5-10 years time. Right, I'm going to move us on. Why does everyone own? I like this.
Everyone underlined.
Okay,
yes. Yeah.
Why does everyone and no one want to sell the police their cars? Now, this came off as a starter. This came off the back of a conversation I had with a person I know who works in the police, and I was like, oh, you know what the undercover cars are, they're this, that, the other.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, we don't have the BMW anymore, just with the 3-litre engine. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, that's interesting. And I was assuming it was because of emissions or whatever else. And he was explaining to me they'd had some problems in that very, very specific use case of police cars.
Yeah.
And then I started talking to you about it, and I was like, well, I remember seeing years ago when I lived in Australia, the Aussie police tried to get the Ford Mustang as one of their highway patrol vehicles, and it failed, and they had a big news story about that. Oh yeah, it hadn't passed their testing, because I'm sure, having met one, and it's a sample size of one, but I sat next to him at Christmas dinner one year, and he was a policeman in Australia who was on the highways, the highway patrol. And he was like, yeah, all of us want the Mustang. And I was like, so just make it work. And he's like, it has to be tested.
Yeah.
And it's failing. And it was failing basically, they have to be able to launch a car in some part of Australia that's 50 degrees, having sat there idling for, 6 hours. And ultimately, I don't think Ford, in their wildest dreams, thought the Mustang was ever going to be sat idled for 10 hours.
That duty cycle is very specific.
It's extremely specific, and so and they ended up going with Holden or someone at the time again. And I don't know, I think the Aussie police have BMWs, funny enough. So obviously the duty cycle still works for them.
Petrol ones and diesels, but
probably a point on them. But interesting that they've obviously kept them, as far as I'm aware. In fact, probably because they have a B58 3-litre, which is, I think that engine could work on the moon, from what I understand.
Amazing thing.
Yeah. So that's probably why they've kept them. But that got me to a point, and I started a conversation with you of, well, surely everyone wants to sell the police a car, because the police are going to buy, I don't know, let's just say they're going to buy 5,000 units. They're going to crash them every other week.
Loads of parts.
Yes,
loads of parts. Yes, I see.
But then on the flip side, if they're going wrong, because they don't get warranty, is that right?
I think they get support, so to speak, but they don't necessarily get a warranty per se. So they will get preferential rates. I think.
When I sold new cars, because obviously when I sold new cars, they had warranties. I can't remember. I think I've had cases where the service, like a car's come into service with a warranty claim and it's been refused, and there was terms of a warranty. You can't just take it onto a track, throttle a car from brand new, and so the engine's blown up. There is some sort of fair usage, and I guess that probably
depends on the brand.
Yeah, I was going to say I've got limited views from the brands I work for, but yeah, I'm fairly sure I've actually seen that. Where
there's also goodwill budgets in some brands. So, for example, some manufacturers who make high performance vehicles, it would be unreasonable, because they market the car as being such a track vehicle, that they wouldn't cover
some sort of sport.
Exactly, especially since they marketed the fact that it's been developed and durability tested, all those kind of things. So, typically speaking, manufacturers have the ability to use a level of discretion. And bear in mind, nowadays you can plug a car in and see how it's been used.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that you have more and more proliferation of automatic gearboxes, that basically means it's impossible to ever rev the car. But there's certain things they can gain now to provide a level of support on that. But no, the police example is a fascinating one. Me and police guys go back a long way.
I find it interesting that ultimately I can imagine they would be a good customer and a bad one. That's kind of where I sort of sit with it. I see they got a lot of Peugeots where I live at the minute.
Yeah, it depends on the force as well. So and it depends on the type of vehicle. So pursuit vehicles probably ones to take most interest in, but actually the requirements for Panda cars, as we used to know them, are also very specific. Interestingly, the police sometimes don't want them too powerful, because the level of driver qualification for varies. So traffic pursuit drivers have very, very high level of training. It's really impressive, the training they go through. If you're kind of Bobby on the beat, or you have a level of driver training, but not anywhere near to that level. So if you have too much power in a C segment hatchback Peugeot, for example, you typically have quite a relatively low level of horsepower, because you don't want them to turn them over in urban environments. But yeah, the level of testing that goes into those cars by forces is quite significant. And I'd need to go and check this, but I'm not sure there's one standard across all force in the UK for police vehicles. They have a level of discretion over the vehicles they choose, depending on the application they want to use them for.
So would it be counter, I suppose, or would there be jurisdictional?
I don't know, where I live, Manchester GMP or Metropolitan Police, those kind of things have different things. There is some variance across police cars, across forces, but there are some staples of the police, and typically the most high profile ones are the traffic pursuit, typical traffic vehicles.
I know, I'm pretty sure wherever if you're watching this in the UK, if you're not watching in the UK, it'll be interesting for you. But I think if you're living in the UK, I think you could probably find a Volvo of, there's a few sort of names like XC90.
Yeah.
They've been armed force for quite a while. I think X5s have been armed. But funny enough, when we said all this about BMW, I'm almost positive they've still kept the X5 armed response vehicles. Almost positive. I'm going to say it for sure. I think it was just the ones they're actually using to go up another motorway that they've decided to cycle out and sell.
Gone back into Volvos.
Yeah. Is there a reason you can think of Volvo would be?
It's very,
because I think that's. I'm trying to think of another manufacturer that I could say definitely. I don't think there's something. In fact, no, I don't think there's anyone in the UK that could say they've never seen a Volvo police car.
Yeah, they're pretty. I mean, for me, the Volvo thing started in 1993 when the 850 T5 originally came. I'm a huge fan of that car.
Yeah.
That was like the ultimate police vehicle.
Yeah.
I think that car dominated through the 90s until, for me, a big changeover point was 1998, 1999 when the E46 was brought out with the straight six diesel. So you had all the performance of the 330 petrol at the time, but then you had the fuel economy and the torque. And actually, if you're looking for high speed pursuit vehicles, that torque from those diesel engines is really, really important. Also, the Volvos weren't necessarily known for their handling finesse, so to speak, and also the fuel consumption of that the wonderful 5-cylinder turbo engine is pretty heavy. When you're driving the car, a BMW straight six diesel in non-pursuit environment, the fuel economy is quite good and the running costs are good. That means you can go on longer in pursuits and those kind of things. So it made a lot of sense to switch to that. And I think that engine for BMW was such a big change. It's a reintroduction of the performance diesel as we know it today, I think. So yeah, but now they're back into Volvos, and that's now a 4-cylinder engines, but they're not limited to 112 miles an hour like the domestic class ones are. So don't. So a few years ago they said that all their cars are limited to 112, which is 180 kilometers an hour. I don't think the police pursuit vehicles have that challenge.
I can't. 112. Got everyone to get away from them.
Yeah, that's a 4-cylinder engine rocking over 300 horsepower. It's impressive, and the duty cycle is really intense. But yeah, the police have very specific requirements. So, for example, there's a lot of parasitic drain on the batteries because of the bigger alternators to power the electrics. Yeah, all those kind of things. The cars have to be left idling for a long period of time, then suddenly roar off into the distance flat out. Sometimes they're left without the engine running, and then have got to go straight away. It's a really, really heavy duty cycle that I'm sure manufacturers would find it very hard to test for. But also, they have to go through a testing program, police vehicles, where they have to do like high speed stopping, all those kind of things to test the brakes. There's various handling pieces. The forces will really test those vehicles. Manufacturers supply this force to those vehicles, typically speaking, to test, and then some of them pass, some of them don't. But there was that period of Volvos, and now, but then into BMWs, and then back into Volvos again for those high profile cars.
Is there anything? I remember someone messaged me on one of the videos I did recently. I think it was the XC70. I did a buyer's guide like 2 years ago, and someone just added a comment the other day saying that, because I mentioned in that video that the Swedish police, whenever I've been in Sweden, I always saw XC70. It was like the go-to, and I made a comment that I'd actually been to a Swedish body shop with my uncle. He was getting a bit of work done to his car. Actually, the place did body repairs and other stuff, and there was this smashed up Volvo in the corner, and this guy was like, yeah, this thing's come back 5 times in the last 5 weeks. It just keeps going out, getting repaired, getting crashed. But he said it won't die. It's done like 350,000 kilometers and blah, blah. And then someone messaged me the other day saying that they're still using the XC70 D5 diesels as, I think, central city patrol cars in Sweden. I was like, I need to see those. Because they'd be like, the newest ones would be 15-ish years old by now, maybe 13 years old. But
I mean, the D4s and D5s, they're incredible. I think they've got an iron block and they've got aluminium head, and they're just designed to just be super, super durable. I think Volvo actually some of their heavy goods vehicles actually use some of that inspiration to develop those engines.
Yeah.
So they really understand durability. So yeah, really, really great engines. So it doesn't surprise me at all.
What do you think the downsides of, if you're a manufacturer or you're, I wouldn't say a lease company, if you're a manufacturer, is there a downside to the police having your cars?
I suppose if you have a high profile accident or a situation where the car potentially has an issue, and it depends on the force and how the communication piece goes. I'm sure there is a risk for manufacturers, I think, by putting into those environments if there's something that goes wrong and it becomes quite high profile. If there's a news article and there's a police car on fire, they're asked what went on here, and someone's quoted saying, "Oh yeah, the car spontaneously combusted." That's not good for brand. Also, you need, typically speaking, these manufacturers will have a special vehicle operations person managing that relationship, and that's a cost, right? There's something else to do. So is it commercially worthwhile doing? So potentially when Ford Group took over Volvo, I think potentially they said it wasn't such a priority for them commercially to carry on with the special vehicle operations piece. I personally think it's got a lot of benefits in terms of the brand and the durability. You think if that car can be a paramedic vehicle, which in some ways has even heavier duty cycles than police vehicles, but that's actually lifts the brand, right? I think potentially it could do. Same logic with super high mileage taxis and those kind of things, and the benefit that has for durability. But there is some drawback. There is a cost involved, but there are benefits in terms of parts sales and those kind of things. But
I suppose it's difficult because you're absolutely right. On the flip side, they can't come out after every single problem and say, I should say you've sold 90,000 police cars and 89,500 of them have done their job. They've done 200,000 miles, been throttled. And actually that's proof of how well you've done your job, because these cars have been used in ways that most people, in fact, pretty much every single person in the public, will never use them. And yet they still survived it. But it's the 500 that either broke down or had a problem or even had a high profile crash.
It's never the driver's fault, is it?
No, exactly. Yeah,
So, it's human nature, right? It's never the driver's fault in terms of how these vehicles. But again, there's few things I can think are more extreme than how those cars live. Again, paramedics cars also have that, but that's a heck of a duty cycle. Yeah, but no, there are there's resource to run that. And also bear in mind that there was a period of time where all those police cars were white and they came back in for auction and they didn't make very much auction, which is why if you look at when BMW started doing a large volume of police cars, E39 530Ds, for example, they were all painted silver, which is for a more sellable car. So also they've moved away now from making unique specifications for the police. So often they'll take a higher spec model as a police car because the residual values are better when they come to sell them at auction.
Oh, interesting.
There's been commercially, the whole police car market moved quite a lot as well in the years I've been around. And it was interesting. Some manufacturers, so for example, I'm pretty sure I saw a Vauxhall Insignia with some VXR front brakes on,
right?
Even though it was a 150 horsepower 2-litre diesel. So there's some mixing and matching and those kind of things. So
would that have been from factory?
Potentially, it might well have been. I don't know for sure. It's a good question, actually. I'd like to know the answer to that. It potentially could be the own police's workshop saying,
because they all have
the VX. They see it as a manufacturer-backed brake upgrade and they fit it to a different engine. But I'm not sure. It's a good question.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Advantages to selling police cars?
The brand piece, brand piece. I mean, it does demonstrate that durability. I mean, it's
just actually emergency vehicles in general, not just police cars. Because I'm just thinking, there's a lot of paramedic. I did. It's up on the wall. You can't see it on the camera. The first magazine piece I ever did was in a Dacia paramedic vehicle,
right?
And the whole PR piece and the reason it was in the magazine was because they essentially were doing a deal. They gave the cars at some reasonable deal to this paramedic team, and the idea was, they go out and try and save lives and take pressure off the system with it. But yeah, that was definitely a positive story that was being covered, that basically this car is being used day in, day out to help the health of the nation and try and save people's lives. And it was a duster. And it was one of the points was they could fit in all of the equipment. And I remember this guy pulled out everything. I felt for him. I was like, you don't have to pull it all out. He's like, no, I'll show you everything I've got in here. And it was just, just everything that you could possibly imagine to try and save someone's life was in this machine, including some gases and stuff. And it had big stickers all over the back of it because, if it got hit from the back, the police needed to know, or the fire service needed to know. So yeah, I suppose that sort of caps off the positives of it. But any other positives you think? I know you're selling them, but like you say, I suppose
I mean, it's factory capacity, right? I mean, if you're going to get a big order all at once, that's your monthly target. For a manufacturer, they're probably motivated to do that, but it does take resource to run that and support that from a technical and after sales perspective as well. But I mean, you sell lots of parts, right?
Yeah.
So if you need to rebuild an engine, they'll rebuild an engine. You don't get much warranty comeback. Because I'm sure. I mean, there'll be individual arrangements. I can't comment across vehicles. But they'll have their own. Police have their own workshops. There's TV programs about those workshops.
And, yes, there are. Watching them, yeah.
And so yeah, there's the throughput of parts, I'd say. But I think it's a good brand builder if you do it correctly, and if your cars live up to that. So if you're a brand who really prides itself on the durability, toughness, and longevity of your cars, that's not a bad brand association going into motor vehicle space.
Yeah, that's because the fact that I would pick out Volvo and I could sort of fairly confidently say I don't know anyone who would have not seen a Volvo police car in the UK over their life at some point. It's probably sort of plays into there. And funny enough, actually, just to end it, we started with a talk about BMW. I'll end it talking about BMW. That I remember they gave the London police, they sold the London Police Force i3s, the hatchback ones.
Yeah, isn't it?
And I think that was the first time I'd ever seen any police force. Maybe, I can't actually think of anyone in Europe that was using. I'm guessing they had range extender ones. I can't imagine they were a bit cheery.
Potentially, yes, but it will, yeah.
Because we need to get there. Or we can have a little range extender that will get us there, or not. It would kind of be like
I mean, it's such an advanced car at the time, right? Another car, a bit like the Audi A2, so it's so far ahead of its time.
Yes,
actually, the brand of London potentially having those advanced police cars looking a bit unusual and spacey is probably quite a good thing as well.
So I couldn't have played more positively for BMW, because I mean, you're basically saying, yes, this is a new type of car for the world at the time, 2013-ish. A new type of car for them, new type of car for the world. Obviously, we've had electric vehicles for 150 odd years.
Electric vehicles came before.
I was going to say, but in the current sphere of them, that was sort of that first lot. And to be able to say we've got however many of them running around with a London police force, actually able to do their job, not token gesture. To do their job, probably was a best advert you could have for sort of EV longevity and everything else at the time, because as best I know about them, they just did their service. I never heard a negative story about a battery pack or whatever else, all the negatives you usually hear about EV. And that was
it's a good PR story. I mean, for example, to quote outside of the UK, Lamborghini have got a history of donating a Gallardo or Huracan or two to the Italian police, and they'll clock up a ridiculous amount of kilometres.
I bet they do, because they're all. I think Alfa Romeo are the same. When I did the video on the Giulia, there was pictures with it's not consigliere. I'm not going to say Italian words because everything I do. Carrier. Consigliere, I think so. Mafia thing. Every time I say Italian words, I get abuse in the comments. So, but they had shown, I think they gave them ones when they first released the car and when they facelifted it. So they replaced their car. And I haven't seen anyone with a Ferrari in Italy. I'm pretty sure someone in Dubai's got one.
For Dubai, it will exist there. Every car going.
They've got Bugattis, haven't they?
They might. They've had a Veyron, I think. Maybe a Chiron as well. So those cars have in Italy they get a very, very hard life. I'm not going to say how many engines they've had, but it's a very interesting brand piece, and I think for their kind of ESG, environmental, social, governmental type reach out to the public kind of thing, it shows like real community aspects. I love the benefit of police vehicles.
I love it. You can sell some Uruses and Hurricanes or whatever else to some people that are just going to spend their time with their police boot on the firewall and say, look, this is part of our ESG. That's one of the better ways of doing it. I've got several questions here. I'm going to ask you, I think this is actually a quicker answer. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think the biggest disconnect between customer and engineer is today?
Oh, wow. You think that's a quick answer?
Yeah, because I think you can give me the headline of it, because I think that's a whole podcast in itself. So I think, what's the headline piece that you'd say? Because look, you're a customer. Yeah, you buy cars, but you also can appreciate, having an engineering knowledge, knowing engineers, knowing what they're trying to do. So you kind of can see the middle picture. There's got to be something that possibly engineers want to do or are pushing to do that either you think customers would be very excited about or not excited about, or just like we brought up the C63 earlier, you and I can sit here and say, actually, from an engineering side, from a car lover's side, that as a technical work is pretty fantastic, actually. The fact it didn't work for the consumer is kind of proof that there was a disconnect happening that they obviously just didn't quite appreciate before.
Yeah, some consumers who, I'd take the point. That disconnect is interesting. So it depends on the engineer, I suppose, and what part they're looking after. So engineers, like everyone else, go through careers. They start off doing small parts of the car, progress on to bigger, more significant parts, and maybe overall become engineering program directors, those kind of things. So it totally depends on what level the engineer's at and it's what stage of their career. Big disconnect. I always ask when I'm working with engineers, which is very regularly, kind of in the most positive way, the so what to kind of the angle. Why is a customer going to really value this piece?
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's way better than it used to be. They're far more customer centric. So that's moved on massively. And also we've got to be cognizant of the fact that many very successful car companies have been run and led and historically based on engineering expertise. In fact, I'd say probably most of the really great legacy brands who are super successful in performance and reliability, durability, have been largely engineering led. Where there are some disconnects sometimes where engineering will spend a large amount of money on a feature that customers don't really care too much about. So, for example, on a luxury car, if you were doing a special kind of cylinder management system to reduce your emissions by 5 to 10%, customer buying that vehicle is buying it for the performance and the status of that vehicle. They're not really too fussed about the fuel consumption.
So Bentley Mulsanne buyer gets told, you now are going to be able to do 19 miles to the gallon compared to the old one you had, which was doing 14, and we've got 10 horsepower more. Is maybe they'd probably rather you say you got 50 horsepower more, and
potentially, but then there's also the flip side to that. Sorry to be difficult. Wherein you say the technology story, so therefore the angle would be that 6.75 litre bi-turbo. We're not leaving it alone. I know it's been the same for 60 odd years, but actually we're keeping on evolving it, keeping on improving it. Look, your emissions have come down and your performance has increased, which is actually a positive story. So there is.
Speaking as someone who's worked at Bentley, do you think that would have? Well, actually, you'd been there around that time, so.
Did it well? Conversations. Did it well? Absolutely. I mean, no one in the luxury space wants to be looking backwards, right?
Really good point.
So really, everything can be improved, right? So also you need a level of justification. So if you're in you're looking at a traditional luxury vehicle, you don't want to be perceived as being back looking or old. You want to yes, you have this luxury vehicle, it's really comfortable, but actually it's still quite modern and advanced. So in terms of its moving forward, it might not be a huge innovation leap, but it's kind of Kaizen progressive growth and improvement. So yeah, it's interesting because powertrain, depending on the brand, is quite important, but there's other features as well. But if, for example, you have got an architecture that's not particularly advanced in its navigation or its ADAS system, therefore you've got to look at the attributes you can influence, and that's maybe design, handling, powertrain, those kind of things. So yeah, that is not a short answer to that.
That's fine. But but actually it was a good answer. That was I like that as an answer that there is this disconnect of, for example, cylinder deactivation. RS6 is probably another good example. I guess.
Oh, it is useful though, getting 30 mpg.
So I was going to say, I guess maybe there's a little bit of a separation of, did the first buyer care as much as the second and third buyer? Because you're sort of in this curve of the second and third buyer is buying it at a time when you will start to expect more fuel economy from the new ones. But
the performance car is more about emissions, I think, because that directly dictates your tax, right? And
yes,
So RS6 is a great example. So variable cylinder management means that you get you drop your CO2 down.
Yeah.
But actually for customers, sometimes with those kind of performance cars, it's more about, it's not so fuel consumption, it's about how often you need to fuel up and those kind of things, which has a value if you need to fuel up less but get all that performance. So there's quite a lot of different things into equation.
We shall, if people are watching that and they like that question, they want more from Owen, they can let me know and I'll re-ask it again.
We'll go to more detail on that one. Absolutely.
Do we have a future of sports cars as SUVs and EV markets expand and two-seater sports cars dwindle? I want to be more specific than saying, I think the Golf R has a future ahead of it, and I think cars that are fast, but also practical, have futures. So we're not asking about that specifically. We're not going to discuss that because I think that's an answer that's easy. And I can kind of see that EV hatchbacks, is it, Alpina?
Alpine.
No, Alpine, sorry, yeah. I knew I was going to confuse them in my head. Yeah,
A290.
yes, they're obviously bringing this out already. So there is already a market that is congregating around, and obviously the Renault 5 itself has got people who are maybe want a bit quicker car, but yeah. So I don't think EV is a particular threat to that. I'm talking more about the fact of 718's disappeared in that sphere. MX-5 has had an extended life, and that's probably. I like the MX-5 example because I worked at Mazda and sold them brand new, and
yeah,
and
I've owned 4.
There we go, yeah, and they are. If you're really into cars and you want to become a better driver, I'd say they're one of the halo cars of, well, go and learn to drive this thing quickly, because it's not going to give you all the power. If you make a mistake, if you're in the wrong gear, you're going to get punished for it, but it is going to give you the handling that you can just cut that corner that little bit tighter, a little bit tighter, a little bit tighter, and get a feel for, I did that deliberately. It wasn't an accident, you know. But ultimately, the reason the ND the ND generation exists is because of a joint venture that went with the Fiat Chrysler group. So they got the Abarth and the Fiat 124 Spiders out of it. Obviously, they didn't run the car for very, very long. And I just wonder, MG Cyberster has been released. I've seen one on the road. I haven't really seen too much talk about it. I actually did. I don't know who I wrote it for, but it was a few years ago. I wrote the release of that car, but then just haven't really heard anything about it.
Very cool doors, but yes.
Yes, yeah. And actually, not okay. Look, it's expensive, but in the sphere of today's prices, I think it's 50 grand, something like that. So it's not. I hate to say 50 grand isn't expensive because people will say, oh, it's crazy, but they, I remember when it was first sort of brought to market and everyone was like, it'll probably be 100 grand and it will be irrelevant. And when it was 50, it's like, well, that's not irrelevant then. That's not the pricing that only a few people can afford. That should be a stretch. And it's EV, so maybe people can get it on a company scheme or whatever else. And then ultimately I haven't seen any. And I do wonder, is that classic two-seater sports car now doomed from this world?
It's a great question. I say emphatically not. I mean, largely dictated by powertrain strategy as well. But I think internal combustion in one form or another is going to be around with us for quite some time yet. And interestingly, the NE, so the next generation MX-5 is already well advanced.
Yeah. And
they are carrying on with things like a manual gearbox, those kind of things.
Yes.
We have seen some manufacturers now, especially in North America, actually going back towards more engaging and interactive cars. So you've seen the challenges Dodge have had with them.
Exactly. There's stolen words.
They know
exactly
the Challenger and all those kind of things. So I think there's going to be a bit of a resurgence, I'd say. The 718 is an interesting example. I'm not sure the EV is completely dead. It might just come back in a different form, and they're now apparently re-engineering the car to be able to incorporate an internal combustion engine. That actually creates a bit more worry for me, actually, because making an EV platform into an internal combustion is very hard to do.
As I understand it, it's going to be it's such a heavy rework that if you're internal, you'd probably say we're building a new car, but they're not going to say that. It's going to be class, because I also think they'll probably do it with some sort of hybrid system. I very much doubt in that area they will just do. I mean, they might do. Maybe they'll do another Spider RS Spider, and that will be combustion only. But I doubt. I think they'll.
That was the original step, wasn't it? They talked about they were going to make a flagship car internal combustion, which made the electric version the kind of cooking car, which is like, I'm not sure how that works now. There's talk, but again, it's all conjecture, right? I mean, there's not been an official press release on it, so
Porsche not going to come out and say. I mean, okay, so you can look at their most recent releases to the market after their financial results, and that was the conversation of there is a new plan coming in, which was as close as they could say with all the speech they had, that they were going to be some reworking, especially in that area, and they didn't ultimately move forward with what would have been the product sort of release and stuff. So clearly they're having a rethink, and ultimately maybe they'll do a triple sort of setup where they've got an EV, they've got a hybrid, and like for Spider RS or the Spider,
Mm.
they'll or GT4, they'll do just a combustion engine because, but again, those will be outside of the sort of question, because I'm thinking more of the person that, I don't know, they've got to a point in their life where they can finally buy a two-seat sports car. So, they've been saving for a long time, or they finally got a promotion or whatever else. I sold people that car years ago. I've met the customer, and
I bought a few. Yeah.
yes, and they were, I did actually sell. I don't want to make the MX-5 seem like the only people buying it are sort of empty nesters or people who fit middle age. I sold a lot of them to young people.
Mm.
I would say, because it just gets
even more so now.
Yeah, I think it's the wrong framing. A lot of people always think it's actually people who don't have kids or whatever else. It isn't. I sold a lot to people who were in their 20s, and actually it was the point where their insurance had finally got to this sort of, it wasn't thousands to insure. Sold a few to people who,
I bought my first MX-5 when I was 20, when I could afford
right there you go.
Yeah.
So that is a market for them. But outside of the MX-5, because that is the exception that's lasted, and been able to last. I do wonder if we are going to have a future,
mm-hmm.
and we can put Porsche's future off to one side because we don't absolutely
that's a whole another podcast.
Yes, exactly that. Who would be? Do you think who would come to market? I know there was talk that the future platform that was going to go under the 718. There was possibility, and it was all just talk, of whether it would be the future Audi TT as well. Because if it had been EV, that kind of fits with Audi's plans, and ultimately they don't have the TT anymore, so that's gone.
Love that car.
I know, yeah. I
love a TT.
I'm actually, again, I'm surprised the TT got killed once it became a bit clearer that the regulations could have possibly given it a path forward, a bit like it did for Mazda.
Well,
I know it was long in the tooth. It was, I think it come out,
but it was fabulous. I mean, I've still got one now. I love it. But yeah, the irresistible move towards electrification, as Volkswagen Group defined it, was well in swing when the time it came to replace that car.
I think it was 2023. I think the very last final edition ones. I don't just call up Dodge and be like, listen, you're doing it with a charge. How do we get? Because I mean, they're still selling the RS3, the with a 5-cylinder.
They're about to hybridize it.
Yeah. So shouldn't you just stick another 10,000 down the line? And
it's a big loss, and I think they are going to come back with that. And in terms of the core question about the future of the sports car, I think if as cars become more electrified, you're losing the engagement of the powertrain, which has been quite a big. We talked a lot about powertrain today, but it's important. But therefore the other senses become to the fore even more. And if you do have to make sports cars electric, which you don't do yet, but you might do in the future, actually electric platforms really can work very well with sports cars. So you can have a skateboard battery pack that means a C of G is really low center of gravity, so your handling is even better. But when you have a powertrain taken out of the equation that's internal combustion, it puts more emphasis on other attributes of the car. So the ride and handling become even more important because you need that stimulation from the drivability. You also, with an electric drivetrain, have far more flexibility because you can have a chest battery pack. The motors are smaller. You can really make a sports car even more intricately designed. So you look at the last generation Ford GT with the V6 engine, because it's a smaller engine but had just much power. You could actually make the aero come to the fore more because you have spaces. So actually, I think electrification of sports cars is actually really exciting. But there are some challenges to that, because often sports cars used to go out in the hills, on a remote, go for big drives, and I think some people found that challenging on the Alpine A290, for example, is that when you're using it hard, you think about your charging stocks. But I think
shouldn't forget the other Alpine, which actually does fit into this question, doesn't it? Because that's a 2-seat sports car.
Yeah, A110.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So obviously they still exist today.
Yes.
And I'm just hesitant. I know there'll always be someone will tell you that that's actually a reasonable price for a car and they can afford it, and actually they're interested in it, and then you'll get a lot of people say, no, it's still too much. But that's a good example there that car still exists. Do you think then possibly we'll see a future where manufacturers are able to say, look, there's a small number of enthusiasts in the world, maybe 5% of the whole car market, maybe it's a bit more, but we're talking about people that love cars but are also willing to put their money on the line and buy what most people would consider a compromised vehicle, 2 seats, not much room in the boot or whatever. So we can sell, 5% of all units are going to be a smaller combustion engine, but we keep the weight down, or maybe a self-charging hybrid, or plug-in hybrid with a small battery or something like that. Do you think that would be the move sort of looking forward? Because it was only 2 years ago, 100% EV, everything.
Yeah.
And not even range extenders or anything like that.
Yeah.
Nothing could be considered if it didn't have a battery. And now we've obviously done a big flip where definitely batteries have their place and they'll keep going and keep increasing. But there's a certain segment of the market, that MX-5 buyer, that wants a...
I mean, bear in mind the UK is quite an extreme example, right? We have a extreme ramp outs of internal combustion that in other global markets they haven't even set a time frame yet.
Yeah,
and when
this is
phasing out internal combustion, right?
This is actually it's outside the scope of this podcast because it's a completely separate one that I wanted to have a conversation with you about. But we'll touch on it just very, very quickly. In that different parts of the world, obviously, are setting their own targets. Some of them are clearer than others. Others seem to be more set in stone than others. How do you think, if we're just talking about just the UK, just for a second, do you think we'll just start to have to align to other places, or do you think we'll keep going with some version of our own theory on how the future looks?
Oh,
I know it's a really and that's why I say it's kind of its own.
Yeah, there's so many different things at play at the moment. I've typically speaking, when there's a big headwind of public opinion on a certain subject, things can change.
Yeah.
And I see the benefits of all the different powertrains, and I'm a huge electric vehicle fan. I think it was in terms of with powertrain.
Nothing is EV today. So
so the phase. I think sports cars will be some of the last vehicles to get internal combustion phased out completely.
Yeah.
And I think some manufacturers already stated that effectively.
Yeah.
So
I think Mercedes led the charge.
Yeah.
Well, part of the lead.
Yeah. And Ford have talked about it in terms of Ford is saying, Porsche said it in terms of 911, those guys. The last car to get electrified will be the GT3 and all those cars. And a fair play, that's understandably enthusiast, but
and upsetting their customers by saying it.
Absolutely not. And I think but drawing any red lines for anything at the moment is very difficult to do in the automotive space. There's so many macro things at play.
Yeah.
Again, as I said previously, utterly fascinating at the moment. But I'd say I think the future for sports cars is bright, even with electrification. And you mentioned the Cyberstray as an interesting example. That still has a fantastic driving range. The quality is really quite good.
This is why
many people.
This is why I bring it up of having not really, having written about them originally, having them found out. So I think it was 2022 when it was sort of confirmed. I think that was when it did the story, and then 2020, it took quite a long time for us to get a confirmed price, but being that it was being developed in China, I think also there was a thought of it'll never happen. And then if it does happen, it'll happen in 10 years. And then it was at, I don't know which motor show, but it was like, this isn't a prop. This car works.
Yeah.
And it's going to be in your market in 6 months.
And that was just demonstrating of SAIC's prowess in terms of turning vehicles around really quickly. That car had to be built in a certain time frame because it was MG's 100-year celebration. It was their present. It was their gift to themselves. It was the pressure similar to what Honda did with the S2000. The Jazz is that car was its 50th birthday present to itself because its first car was a sports car. So they had to do that in a certain period of time. And fair play, they went first.
Absolutely.
A lot of people have been watching that car very, very closely. So it is a trailblazer. It's had its challenges in terms of market acceptability, but I don't think it takes away from the product attributes.
I would say if you're watching this and you are interested in some sort of sports car in your future, I would call up an MG dealer and by the way, no sponsorship or anything going on here. Absolutely not. And I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. I would probably just have a drive of it, go and have a test drive it just to see. Maybe it doesn't suit you at all. Maybe you hate it, but I'm not sure what the next one will be. The next time you can go and just have a go in a 2-seat sports car classed in the EV category. Maybe the follow-ups will all be hybrids and we won't see that again. I'm always a big believer in if there is something different, go and have a drive of it now, because a V10 diesel is not coming back. You had your chance 15 years ago to go and have a test drive.
A V12 diesel, please. Audi Q7.
Yes. You had your chance to go and have a go.
Didn't get one.
If you didn't take it, you missed it. And you'll never be able to just in the future go. Because I'm sure at the time, maybe someone would have said back then when the Q7 V12 diesel, they would have gone, we might do another one. Someone might have thought that because diesel was so popular at the time. And of course,
thanks Dieselgate.
Yeah, that was it. Never happening. So you never know what's around the corner. And I'd say if you are in that market, it is probably worth just having, you can book yourself in. I'm sure that they'll happily take someone on a quick drive. Last question of this podcast, and then we'll wrap it up. This comes off of a comment actually. So I did the video recently on the main channel, which was about cars that are 10 years old. We talked about that before the podcast, and a lot of the comments that I've had back are people who were saying, actually, it's not 10 years old. It's about 7 years old. So the cars that were facelifted, so they were released in like 2013, 2012, got a facelift around 16 because they were just in the era when then screens came in a bit bigger, but they weren't dominant. The old controls were all still there because it was the car from 2013, but
Electrical architecture was the same.
yes. And they had to then have, like radar cruise, things like that, because they were all new. And because people were facelifting the car, people like yourself went, we better stuff it full of this because that will sell.
Quite that bad, but I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, you get the point. Someone somewhere went, well, we have the technology. Actually, it's not going to increase the price that much. We can put it in the facelift. We haven't got to wait for the next gen. And so the question goes in that 2018, 2019 seems like a golden moment in cars. So it's that 2013 cars that were getting updated, latest tech. You can connect your phone, Apple CarPlay, all that sort of stuff was standard. You're not having to do anything afterwards. Do you think that viewpoint will change? Because we always have a rose-tinted glasses of whatever was 10 years ago was better. But of course, in 10 years, we might look at today and say better. But do you think it's a particular moment in the market was there then? Or do you think it's just that people are sort of like looking back at that time and maybe they're not that enthused about brand new at the moment?
I think we're living in a period at the moment of a lot of new tech bedding in. And a lot of that tech being legal requirement in some markets. So, for example, a lot of these warning systems and ADAS systems, ADAS, there you go. ADAS, joys of those. We'll cover that off a different one, but we'll summarize it. But yeah,
one thing I would say, I have to cut it every single time I do a review on a car. I actually cut a bit of me talking about ADAS.
Okay.
Because otherwise it would be every single review.
Sure.
But my only point is that I turn off lane. I leave some of it on, but lane assist and speed warning are the two I always turn off. Speed warning mainly because the speedo tells me what the speed limit is. If I'm in a zone, there's a zone nearby me that is actually a 60, but it warns you if you go over 40. So there's signs up on the road, and it's just trying to get people to slow down, but they don't want to change the speed limit. So this car then sees that's a 40 and goes, well, you're going too fast. I'm like, okay, off. Yeah, I don't want to be interrupted.
I feel like I've triggered you, Miles.
But at the same time, the ADAS if I could turn one off, it would just be the steering assist. I don't mind the emergency brake. I think that's great. But I realize I talk about it every review, and it's probably, it's just boring for people to hear the same thing over and over. So
we're living and breathing it at the moment. And I think with there's the legislative framework and regulatory framework has meant that certain systems have to come in. I understand the reasons as to why. So you look at Euro NCAP, the car's super safe, crashing cars. The next frontier was actually accident prevention. And therefore, so the premise is actually really good to reduce accidents and not just having active safety. So stopping you having an accident in the first place rather than just passive safety.
Absolutely.
Accident. So I get the premise completely. I liken it to stability control, ESC as we know it. When the systems first came out, they were quite clunky. You had traction control that was very interventionist.
Yeah.
You had DSC systems on some cars that threw them back into line. And therefore, what happens is if people felt it impinged on their drivability, they'd switch them off. And the people who switched them off exactly needed the systems the most potentially.
Yep.
As time goes on, those systems have been finessed more and more to be much more subtle. The requirement now to turn off a stability control system in day-to-day driving is really quite negligible because they're so integrated.
Yeah.
I think the same thing is going to happen to some of these systems, whereas if they're tuned properly and they are matured and they have testing and they're still compliant, those systems will get less and less interventionist. Everybody will feel the need to switch them off less.
I do agree with you, because I think I've seen a few car manufacturers now. I said the only one that actually really frustrates me is the lane assist, only because it's not perfect, like you say. It's in that, and there's, for example, again, roundabout near me goes from one lane into three. So if you try drifting across early, it will think you're drifting off the road, not trying to find that new lane, because that new lane hasn't quite technically started, but you can see the road space. And so it will fight you. But some cars have settings for it. So ADAS can be level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 3 is aggressive. it will fire you back in. Level 2, middle, and then level 1 is very mild. The ones I don't like are the ones that actually you can't adjust, because if they are too aggressive, you only have options of off, on. And in the one time you forget to turn them off, you'll get this sudden tug at the steering wheel and you think, I've either hit something or I've lost traction. That's quite a worrying.
Or you get phantom braking. That's what everyone's really worried about.
Yeah, and I think if I'm worried about it and I'm interested in cars, and I drive lots of cars and that sort of stuff, I just worry about the person who isn't that interested in cars, who just upgrades every 5 years or 10 years, suddenly gets in one and the steering wheel turns them off the road, or does something that's going to be the last time they ever want to use the system. Before 2024, you could just turn it off and it would stay off. And that's again for me where I'm like, if I could turn it off and leave it off, I would actually consider to turn it on if I ever, for example, if I was doing an airport run at 2 a.m, I want the system on just in case. But if it's coming on, my start procedure is engine on, assists, off, and then I go.
And I think it will get better with coming generations.
Well, as I say, yeah.
Because the safety organizations, I think, have now started to acknowledge that this is an issue. And I think there hasn't been a correlation between these new systems coming into a significant reduction in accidents or insurance.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I don't believe there has been a big correlation in that. So
I could understand that.
Yeah. So maybe there's been a correlation in the wrong direction. So there'll be a lot of soul searching and studying going on in these organizations and OEMs in terms of how to optimize this. Some do it better than others, but ultimately there is a requirement currently to have a lot of these systems in place as standard.
Yeah, it's a regulation.
But I think it will again, like the stability control systems, will improve over time.
The other example, I'm going to make the whole thing about me hating it. If they had the ability to tell that what you're trying to avoid is a pothole, because I've had it in new cars when they're starting to do a road test in them. There's a few roads around me. I know if I turn left a bit, turn right a bit, I'm going to avoid the 2 big wheel breakers. But if you are going on a straight road and you veer off it slightly and then veer the other way, I know I'm avoiding potholes. The system doesn't, so it will just turn me into the pothole because that's actually in the middle of the road. And again, yes, if the system's got smarter and we're able to understand that little bit of nuance of, I could see that massive crater in the road and there's logic behind it that says a driver would try and avoid that, and it wasn't then tugging at the wheel. But if it wasn't there and I turned, that it would understand.
So there is actually already tier 1 supply base who are using an evolution of the road scanning systems originally developed for Magic Carpet Ride, those kind of things.
Oh yeah.
To actually start to read the road surface more. You've always
and that will be an evolution.
I think that would be really, really. I think you're right. It'd be really good. I mean, and also combined with GPS and reporting systems as well about potholes in the road. You already see people like Porsche with nose lift, for example, having that synced into the navigation system. If you activate it at a certain point, to remember where you've activated it and then activate it again automatically the next time. This is exactly the kind of innovation that makes that is actually really positive.
Yes.
And can actually make it. I mean, it doesn't take the onus of councils to fix their potholes, obviously.
No, not.
But
sometimes you do just.
It's a real life example. It's a great example of a real life innovation that could actually make driving far more comfortable and safe.
And I think people would then start leaving it on, because it is only in the cases of, my best example is, as I say, those potholes and the roundabout nearby, because the roundabout is going over the top of an A road, a dual carriageway. It's splitting from a local road of single into 3, but again, maybe that's a bit of road design. Maybe there's a conversation to be had with local councils and to sort of say, this is the tech now. It needs you to put the line there, not there, because of the way it's reading it, or whatever it may be. But it will fight you. And, if the guy behind you thinks, oh, he's going left, I'll nip round him, and you turn into him, that's,
So it's possible. Absolutely.
But that doesn't answer the question.
Interesting, eh?
Do you think, where we are, I do think there's a lot of appreciation and general goodwill towards cars around that sort of 7-ish, 8-ish year marker, maybe 10 years, maybe a bit less, but somewhere between the sort of 2013, 2020, I'd say that. There seems to be a lot of positive. And do you think that's just people in 2010 were saying cars in the 90s were great? Or do you think It's something
It's
about
definitely
those
been that. Look, I
cars.
mean, you look at certain attributes. Like I remember when everyone was up in arms about power steering systems, HPAS. They're going damaging steering feel, and then those been matured again and again and again. We had the same back steering in a Porsche 991 with electric power steering. Now that's the barely registers as being an issue now.
Yeah.
We have a habit of rose-tinted glasses looking back. I personally have seen so much development in cars positively going forward for real drivers and everything like that. So but no, I think there's an interesting there are some we're going through a period, as I said earlier, of some of these systems not being fully integrated yet and fully matured yet, which is causing some annoyance to a vast array of different kinds of drivers. Not everyone, but a large chunk of drivers are have some issues with them. I think that will improve. But yeah, so in terms of there was certainly a period of time where quality was still very, very strong in cars. There was still really good authentic powertrains. There was really kind of authentic ride and handling and steering, all those kind of things. And I think the time frame you specified was a really golden era for cars. But even then, we were still whinging about those cars not being as good as previous ones, right?
Yeah, interesting.
So you could say that yeah, I've got this C7 Audi RS6. It's great and all those things, but it's less powerful than the V10 and it's not quite as exotic. You now look back thinking, actually, the C7 RS6 has a lighter engine, but less nose weight. The gearbox is significantly better. It's less expensive to fix. All those kind of things. So it totally depends on the time frame you're speaking about. But we have a habit of looking back, thinking things are better. I think the period you specified was a very strong period for cars, even though by that point, manual gearboxes and performance vehicles are already way down the road of dying out by that point as well.
Yes, good point.
So and electric power steering systems were there, and people were missing hydraulic power steering.
I actually remember people bemoaning the new Focus RS came out. I think it's 2017, but of course it didn't have the 5-cylinder.
Yeah,
that the old one had,
the full banger,
and so that was getting. There was a little bit going on at the time.
Yeah,
because that was
the drift mode wasn't enough to offset it.
Yes,
exactly that.
Yeah, so I suppose there is an element of it. I do wonder if the one thing I commented on the video, I said MVH seems to have been the biggest dramatic change I can notice in a car that's 10 years old to now. Now there is a little bit of a 10-year-old cars, like you'd say, bushings have been worn, the suspensions have been worn, but generally speaking. I remember when I worked in classics, I drove an MGB GT with a V8 in it. The thing, you could feel every vibration, but it was fantastic because I was taking it for taking that for a run down a back road for the guy who was selling it. I was writing an article for him. That was an amazing experience. Got into the car I had at the time, which was a 2015 car, and it felt so numb and dull, and it almost felt dumb in comparison because it took that second. Then you get out of that into a 2026 car, and you're like, oh, this is, I barely feel the road in this, or there's no vibration in comparison. So there's sort of this detachment going along the way. And it's funny.
It's getting more and more refined, right?
Yeah. And I remember in the video saying, I think part of me likes the sort of shakier ride and the sort of feedback. And I remember saying to someone, with my father-in-law actually, I said to him, oh, I went out in an MGB GT V8. And he was like, oh, but that was horrible. I was like, it's fantastic. But he remembers it when it was a new car, buying one himself, age 23 or whatever. And he was like, it compared to today, he said that car was rubbish. And I was like,
driving a Hammer, all the nose over the front end.
So there's a generational thing where he's gone, well, the fact he's an engineer as well probably didn't help this conversation because he's sort of appreciating the improvements. And he's gone, well, my BMW that I've got does 4 times the fuel economy, is 4 times as powerful, can carry this, carry that. I'm like, all granted, but there was something about the character. He's like, yeah, because you took it for a run down the road. He said, if you drove that at 6 a.m. in the sleet and, with your candles of headlights and your crap windscreen wipers. So I guess
it depends the stage of life you're at as well, right? So if you value certain attributes as you mature in the world, you value certain attributes of cars that you didn't value or did when you were younger.
Yeah.
So those things matter more or less depending on what stage of life you're at. So yeah.
I do think there is something to be said for that age of cars. I said at the end of the video that I did for this that I think it's not that new cars have got in any way worse. I think they did such a good job. 2015, if we want to use that and years around it,
strong, yeah,
did so well that actually 10 years on, I just think when I was selling cars and you'd sell a car to someone who had a 2002 car into a 2010 car, it was a better car.
Yeah.
And there really wasn't an argument you could make. This was more fuel efficient, more powerful, nicer to be in, had all the tech, had, and had all the things that in 2002 only an S-Class driver had. And then that same thing applies 2010 to 2017-ish. You go, oh, actually, yeah, if you got out of a 2010 car into a 2017 car, you've got everything that Mercedes S-Class of 2010 had, but you've also got more power, more fuel efficiency. And then you do that next leap, and I just think, maybe because we're looking more at different powertrains, maybe because the investment is going to adding in technology because part of the market demands it, part of the market doesn't demand it, but kind of everyone they know's got it, and it just, the leap maybe just isn't as clear and obvious.
I mean, the time frame you just specified is really interesting. Ones 2002, 2010. Did you say?
Yeah.
So you're going from Mark IV Golf to Mark VI Golf.
Yes.
And then that change was massive.
Yeah, I mean, like,
two cars.
One of the easiest sales you can make in the world. Someone drives in a Mark IV Golf in 2010. You go, there's a Mark VI.
Yeah.
So even say GTI. So you're coming out of the Mark IV, which a lot of people didn't really like, or well at the time, but going on didn't really like. And you get into a Mark VI GTI. You go, yeah, this is a better car. It really was. And then
ironically, it would have been an even bigger change as a Mark V, but yes.
Yes. And then, if you give the example of then someone in a Mark V getting into a Mark VII, as good as the Mark V was, Mark VII was just such a...
But from a Mark VII to a Mark 8.5?
It's interesting because that's essentially what I was doing in the test for a chassis point of view. And this comment came off the back of someone, I think they had a performance pack, 2018 Golf GTI. And I said, I've got
one. Amazing.
A friend of mine's dad has one. He's kind of interested in cars, not that interested. He bought one of those. And I said, oh, maybe you want to check out GTE for your next car, because he's not throttling it on back roads. He likes the nicer version of something. I was like, well, you'll get hybrid, you'll get more power, actually, 270. He's like, oh, no, I like the car I've got. And I was like, well, what about Mark 8 GTI? He went, oh, I had a look in one, but I didn't really like the screen. And that was the end of the conversation. And I was like, how interesting that if he'd been in a Mark 5 or a Mark, well, he was in a Mark 5 and jumped to Mark 7, no problem. So it's interesting. And again, I don't think that's a knock on the 8.5 GTI, because that's a great car. Really is a great car. But again, the Mark 7 was, that's a high point. They need to build some, maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe we're going through a phase where the cars don't improve much. So the cars in 3 or 4 years feel like such a big jump.
And the tech, and it's that people are having issues with some people are having issues with the screens and lack of physical buttons, those kind of things.
Yeah.
I mean, potentially peak Golf is a Mark 7.5 Golf R.
Yeah. It probably is. Yeah. I mean, we can end the podcast there. But it probably, if we look at, you had Mitsubishi Evos, early 2000s. If you'd have said to someone when the Evo 8 came out, there will be a Golf one day that has an all-wheel drive system, has the same power, doesn't have to be serviced every 5,000 miles, isn't so highly strung that you've got to worry about it, and will be the comfort of a regular Golf, and you just take it to the dealer once a year and then throttle it the rest of the time, almost would have sounded slightly unbelievable from where we were. And then you kind of feel for the Mark 8.5 R, because it's actually a really good car, the 8.5 particularly. Yeah. The 8, I think it gets let down by the infotainment system was early, so it just feels a bit clunky. And the haptic buttons on the steering didn't help it. Yeah. When they went to 8.5, I feel a bit sorry for Volkswagen Group in general. They made exactly the changes the market were looking for. In fact, again, if they could have pulled the climate controls out of a Mark 7, and so you could just physically move the climate and the volume knob, and the volume, if they could have just pulled those two out of it, there would have been nothing more to say. It would have just been, by 8.5. It's that, and plus the 7.5 is just so good that, I don't know, if you've got a 7.5 that's in good condition, I imagine the only point that will get you out of it is when it's done 160, probably do 150,000 miles. But the point where it's so battered, you're like, I've got to, or maybe there'll be the people that we talked about at the start of the Was it the start of this podcast or the start of the video? Start of this podcast, people spending the entire value of a car to build it back up to what it originally.
I fully empathise with that.
Maybe that'll be the future of modifying and restoring cars. Anyway, well, thank you for being here, Owen. It's been really good. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. If you have, subscribe. We have it on video. We also, you may just be listening to this, and if you are, then please stick around for the next one. Make sure you add a follow. I shall see you in the next one.